A massive grizzly stood motionless at the edge of the dense, wind-swept forest. The late afternoon sun dipped low, casting golden streaks across its thick, scarred coat. Its breath steamed in the crisp air as its dark, intelligent eyes locked onto the man stepping out of an old, battered truck. Ethan froze. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. For a split second, neither moved. Could it be? 2 years of silence. No tracks, no sightings, nothing. And now, here he was. Bruno. The memories came crashing back like an avalanche, raw, bright, and brutal. 2 winters ago, Ethan had been trekking alone through the backcountry during one of the worst blizzards of the decade. A collapsed den caught his attention, a faint cry beneath the snow. When he dug through the drift with gloved hands numb from cold, he hadn't expected to find life. But there, nestled under a pile of broken branches and half-frozen earth, was a bear cub, barely breathing, ribs poking through matted fur, a back leg twisted unnaturally, the mother nowhere in sight. Most would have left it. But not Ethan. An ex-forest ranger turned recluse, Ethan knew the rules: never interfere with wild animals. But as he wrapped the cub in his coat, his only thought was, no one else is coming. He carried Bruno, he named the cub later, over 10 miles back to his cabin, battling snow that reached his knees, the cub's weak whimpers barely audible through the storm. At first, it was a matter of survival. Bottle feeding, wound care, around-the-clock attention. But something strange happened. The cub didn't behave like others Ethan had seen before. There was a softness in his gaze, a curiosity, a vulnerability. Ethan had seen a lot in his time in the wild. Wounded wolves, orphaned moose calves, even a cougar once. But this was different. Bruno didn't just tolerate Ethan's presence. He needed it. The days turned into weeks. The injuries healed, but the bond grew stronger. Bruno would follow Ethan like a shadow, his massive paws thudding softly behind him. He learned Ethan's voice, his rhythms, his silences. When Ethan raised his hand, Bruno would sit. When Ethan crouched, the bear mirrored him. It wasn't taming, it was understanding. Ethan built a large, forested enclosure behind his home. Not a cage, never that, but a protected sanctuary where Bruno could roam, hidden from the road, away from prying eyes. It wasn't legal, but it was safe, ethical even. Ethan made sure Bruno retained his instincts. The bear hunted small game, climbed, foraged, swam in the river that cut through the property. But he always came back at dusk, always, to lay near Ethan's porch as the man sipped tea and read under a blanket. Once, Ethan had to be hospitalized for a week after a fall. When he returned, the caretaker told him something that chilled him. Bruno hadn't eaten once the entire time. The bear had simply sat by the porch, staring into the forest, waiting. There were moments, quiet, sacred moments, when the bond felt beyond human comprehension. Like the time Ethan taught him a simple hand signal for hug, half as a joke. Bruno responded by lumbering over, rising on his hind legs and gently wrapping his huge arms around Ethan's shoulders. His strength could have crushed him, but it never did. They were brothers. In some strange, impossible way, they were family. But peace never lasts. Ethan never found out who reported him. Maybe a hiker caught a glimpse. Maybe a distant neighbor grew suspicious. One morning, the authorities showed up. Wildlife enforcement with tranquilizer guns and cold stares. They said it was unsafe, illegal, a risk to public safety. Ethan argued, begged, showed them the enclosure, the routines, the training, the love. But they wouldn't listen. They had orders. And when they tried to take Bruno, the bear fought back, not with claws or teeth, but with panic, desperation. He let out a cry that was so human in its grief it shattered something inside Ethan. When the dart hit Bruno, he stumbled, not just from the drug, but from heartbreak. He reached out, massive paw outstretched as if pleading with Ethan not to let them take him. Ethan held his gaze until the very last second, until the eyes he knew so well rolled back and the bear collapsed. They didn't even tell Ethan where they were taking him. Said it was for the bear's safety. That contact would never be allowed again. He searched, filed appeals, contacted sanctuaries. Nothing. It was like Bruno had vanished from the face of the earth. Until now. Now, that same bear stood at the edge of the forest, unmoving, unblinking, and Ethan. He took one slow step forward. Bruno. The bear flinched, nostrils flaring, muscles tightening, and then he stepped into the light. Before the sun broke over the horizon, Ethan was already on the move. His breath fogged in the icy air as he locked the old truck and slung his pack over one shoulder. Inside, he'd packed only the essentials. A battered, slobber-worn toy bear that Bruno had once carried everywhere like a cub of his own, and a bag of dried blueberries and fish jerky, his favorite treats. His boots crunched through frost-covered leaves as he climbed the narrow ridge path above the valley. It had snowed lightly overnight, and the trail was slick, the rocks beneath just icy enough to make every step uncertain. The higher he climbed, the quieter the forest became, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Every branch, every bend in the trail carried echoes of the past. Ethan remembered carrying a much smaller Bruno on his back once, wrapped in a towel, the bear cub weak and trembling against his shoulders. He remembered how Bruno used to bat playfully at his legs when they walked through streams, how he'd grumble when Ethan wasn't fast enough with breakfast, how he'd lay with his head in Ethan's lap on cold mornings. All of that had been torn away. Now, after 2 years of silence, Ethan had seen him again. But was it really him? Could Bruno have survived, escaped, made his way back across mountains, rivers, and God knew what dangers? Or was it wishful thinking? A trick of the light? He reached the ridge just as golden sunlight began piercing through the trees. The forest opened into a small clearing, quiet and still, the silence so complete it rang in his ears. And then, movement. A large shadow stepped from between the trees. Ethan froze mid-step. Just 30 yards ahead, a massive bear stood, partially obscured by mist and pine trunks. The bear wasn't charging, wasn't growling. It was simply watching. Still, tall, familiar. Ethan's heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Slowly, without a word, he dropped his bag to the ground and knelt. He reached in and pulled out the toy bear. Worn, patched, one eye missing. With a trembling hand, he tossed it gently forward across the snow-dusted ground. The bear tilted its head. Then, it stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. It paused near the toy, sniffed it, then let out a low, guttural huff. A sound that hit Ethan like a freight train. "Bruno," Ethan whispered. The bear looked at him. Ethan slowly raised his right hand and held it out to the side, palm open, fingers curved slightly forward. The old signal, the one Bruno always loved, the one that meant hug. The forest was so quiet Ethan could hear the creak of pine branches overhead. And then, Bruno mimicked the gesture. His huge paw lifted, mirroring Ethan's signal. And just like that, he charged. Not with aggression, but with pure emotion. Ethan had no time to react. He barely had time to brace before the massive bear wrapped both arms around him, chest to chest, pressing him into the snowy ground with stunning gentleness. Ethan let out a sound between a sob and a laugh. He clutched the thick fur around Bruno's shoulders, burying his face in it. The bear rumbled, a soft, vibrating sound like a purr. Then, as if no time had passed, he licked Ethan's face, clumsy and wet and full of joy. Tears ran freely down Ethan's cheeks. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. Just held the bear who had once been his whole world. Images burst through his mind. Bruno chasing butterflies in the meadow behind the cabin. Bruno dragging logs into a pile and watching them burn with childlike wonder. Bruno lying beside him in the dark as rain beat against the tin roof. The bond was real, undeniable, and still alive. But then, A rustle. Ethan stiffened. Bruno's ears perked. A faint hum. Mechanical. High-pitched. Ethan looked up and saw a drone hovering just above the tree line, its blinking red light recording everything. No, Ethan muttered, standing up slowly, shielding Bruno with his body. Bruno growled, low and angry now, sensing the shift. Then, snap! Something hit a tree just feet away. A white-feathered dart vibrated in the bark. Then another. Gunshots echoed across the ridge. Tranquilizer darts. Someone was here, armed, watching. Ethan didn't wait. "Run!" he yelled, not at the bear, but beside him, already sprinting for the cover of the trees. Bruno thundered after him, not needing a command. Behind them, another dart hissed past, embedding in the ground. This wasn't over. Someone knew Bruno was back, and they were going to take him again. Or worse. The world returned in fragments. A dull ache throbbed behind Ethan's eyes. The scent of pine needles and wet earth filled his nostrils. Cold air bit at his cheeks as he stirred, groaning, his body stiff with pain. When he tried to sit up, a wave of dizziness forced him back down. He blinked hard, eyes adjusting to dim light filtering through the roof of a crude forest shelter, just fallen branches lashed together with vines, packed in with leaves. It wasn't his. It wasn't familiar. And then, a massive shadow shifted beside him. Bruno. The bear lay curled near the wall, sides rising and falling with effort. His fur was streaked with mud and blood, and his breathing was labored, but his eyes were alert, watching Ethan, protecting him. "Bruno," Ethan whispered hoarsely, reaching out. The bear let out a soft, guttural sound. It was the same sound he'd made the first time Ethan fed him, years ago. The sound of trust, of relief. Ethan glanced around. There were faint drag marks in the snow leading into the shelter. His clothes were soaked, shoulders scraped raw, and bruises bloomed across his arms. Bruno had carried him. All that weight, through the cold, through danger, and he'd brought Ethan here. Tears stung Ethan's eyes again, but there was no time to feel. A crunch outside made him freeze. Not an animal. Boots. He crawled to the edge of the shelter and peeked through a gap. Footprints, fresh, scattered around in erratic patterns. At least 3 different sets. Whoever had fired those darts was still nearby. Still looking. They weren't giving up. Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't just a chance encounter. The timing. The drone, the weapons, the dart marks on trees that had been aimed to miss and flush them in a certain direction. This wasn't some hiker spotting a rogue bear. This was planned. They had known Bruno was here, which meant someone had sent them. He turned back toward Bruno. The bear was licking at his side where a patch of fur had been roughly torn away. As Ethan leaned closer, something caught his eye. A hard glint under the skin. He knelt and gently parted the fur. There, just beneath the surface, embedded under a scar, was a small metal tag. A microchip. Ethan's stomach dropped. It wasn't just for ID, it was a tracking device. His hands trembled as he dug into his pocket and pulled out his old multi-tool. Working carefully, whispering apologies to Bruno with every movement, he dug it out. The tag was old, but active. And suddenly, memories came rushing back. A voice. A woman's voice, hushed over a burner phone 2 years ago. "Ethan, if you ever get this, I don't know how long I have, but that reserve, it's not what they say. They're not protecting animals. They're selling them. Healthy ones. Rare ones. Especially the ones who bond with humans. They say it's for funding, but it's a pipeline. Private zoos, illegal collectors, billionaires in foreign countries. I had to tell someone. I tried to hide Bruno when he arrived, but they found out. I haven't seen him since." He had dismissed the message then, grief-stricken and paranoid. But now, everything made sense. Bruno hadn't just been relocated. He was being hunted. Ethan turned back toward his old friend. Bruno looked thinner than he remembered, his body marked with scars he'd never seen before. Long slashes across his back, patches of fur missing, one ear partially torn. Each injury told a story. Each wound a silent chapter of Bruno's brutal 2-year journey. Ethan spoke softly as he examined him, brushing dirt and leaves from the bear's thick coat. "You escaped, didn't you? You didn't just survive. You got out." From the scars, the way Bruno moved, the limp in his left leg, it was clear. He had fought his way out of the reserve, avoided humans, navigated wilderness. He had made it all the way back here, to the region where he'd grown up beside Ethan, not by accident, but on purpose. He had remembered. He had returned. Ethan sat in silence, the truth settling around him like snowfall. Bruno had risked everything to come back, not just to survive, but to find him. And now, the people who lost him once weren't going to let him slip away again. They'd found him. They'd tracked him. And if Ethan didn't act fast, they were going to take Bruno. Or kill him. And no one would ever know the truth. The silence before the chaos was deafening. Ethan stood tall, chest heaving, arms spread protectively in front of Bruno as the poachers closed in. His boots were planted in snow turned slushy with blood. Bruno's blood. The bear, though battered and limping, still stood behind him, eyes blazing with a primal ferocity that made the forest itself seem to hold its breath. Across from them, the lead poacher, a thick-set man with sun-leathered skin and dead eyes, raised his rifle. "Move," he barked. Ethan didn't flinch. "You'll have to shoot me first." The man scoffed, confused. "Why would you die for a bear?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to, because behind him, Bruno shifted his weight, letting out a low, guttural growl that echoed like thunder through the trees. The first shot never came, because Bruno lunged. A blur of fur and fury, the massive bear collided with one of the gunmen, slamming him into a tree so hard the bark cracked open. Screams erupted. A second man raised his weapon, but Ethan was already moving. He yanked the flare gun from his belt, aimed, and fired. A brilliant, blinding flash exploded in the center of the clearing. The poachers staggered back, eyes seared, crying out. And then, chaos. Bruno roared, swiping with enough force to break bone. Another poacher went down, yelping in terror. Ethan ducked and rolled as bullets tore through the trees, bark flying. He grabbed a fallen rifle and flung it into the river. But Bruno kept fighting. Even as his strength faded, even as crimson bloomed across his side, he stood his ground. He was defending Ethan, protecting him. And then, the shot. It rang louder than the rest. Ethan turned. Time slowed. The lead poacher stood just 10 feet away, rifle aimed directly at Ethan's heart. His finger squeezed the trigger. Bruno saw it. With a final burst of energy, the bear threw himself forward. The bullet hit flesh with a sickening thud. Bruno collapsed against Ethan's chest, an avalanche of warm, trembling fur. The impact drove Ethan to his knees. The rifle clattered to the ground. For a moment, all was still. "No, no, no, no," Ethan gasped, cradling Bruno's massive head in his arms. Blood stained his shirt, his hands, the snow. "Stay with me, please. You hear me? Stay with me." Bruno's breathing was shallow. His eyes, clouded but focused, locked with Ethan's. The bear's paw lifted weakly, and then, with the gentleness only they knew, he licked Ethan's hand. One last time. Ethan's scream tore through the forest, and then, sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees. Trucks screeched to a stop. Dozens of boots hit the ground. Forest rangers, wildlife enforcement, EMTs. A drone buzzed overhead, still recording. The poachers tried to flee but were tackled, disarmed, arrested on the spot. One of the officers rushed to Ethan's side, already calling in coordinates for an emergency airlift. "He's still breathing," the medic shouted. "We can save him." Ethan didn't move from Bruno's side. He held him all the way to the chopper. Weeks passed. The video went viral within hours. An armed standoff, a bear defending his human, and a man refusing to leave his best friend's side. Headlines exploded. Man and bear save each other from wildlife traffickers. Ex-forest ranger uncovers illegal animal trade at protected reserve. A bear's loyalty saves a life and exposes a crime ring. Ethan testified against the reserve, exposing the dark underbelly of illegal animal sales. The whistleblower's message resurfaced, and her name was finally cleared. A dozen arrests followed. And Bruno, he made it. Barely. But he pulled through. His injuries required months of care, but he recovered in a place designed just for him, a sprawling wildlife sanctuary at the edge of the very forest where he grew up, built and managed by Ethan, and always with an extra acre of forest, untouched, wild, peaceful, where Bruno could roam. The tourists didn't know what to make of it at first. A bear that hugs a human? Must be staged. Impossible. But when they saw it for themselves, when the grizzly ambled toward Ethan at the edge of the trail, pressed his head gently into the man's chest and wrapped his arms around him, well, then they understood. Years later. The sun dipped low over the lake, painting the water gold. Ethan sat beneath a tree, now grayer, slower, but peaceful. Bruno, older too, with a silver streak through his fur, rested beside him. His massive head lay in Ethan's lap. A family passed by on a guided tour. A curious little boy with a wide-brimmed hat paused and looked at the pair. "Is it true?" the boy asked. "That bear once saved your life?" Ethan looked down at Bruno, who let out a contented huff in his sleep. He smiled, eyes misty. "No," he said softly. "He saved my heart.